It's Friday, January 30th, 2026, and this is the Washington Times front page. Thanks for joining us. I'm George Gerbo. Senate leaders are working to pass a bipartisan spending package to avoid a partial government shutdown, but with only a 2-week stopgap for the Department of Homeland Security. Lindsay McPherson reports the DHS stopgap that Senate leaders and the White House agreed to is designed to buy time to renegotiate the department's full-year funding bill with additional restrictions on ICE to prevent the type of violence that has unfolded in Minnesota. Some House Republicans are threatening to block the measure or demand further changes, but those objections can be overcome if there's at least a 2/3 bipartisan majority in support of fast-tracking the bill. The spending package leaves untouched 5 full-year spending bills funding the Departments of Defense, Education, Health and Human Services, Housing and Urban Development, Labor, State, Transportation, and Treasury that have broad bipartisan support. A brief funding lapse is set to begin at midnight Friday until the House returns to Washington. White House border czar Tom Homan says he is working on a drawdown plan to remove some federal agents and officers out of Minnesota. Stephen Dinan reports Homan has secured some agreements from state and local leaders to cooperate better with the government in turning over deportation targets from their prisons and jails. Homan, who was tapped this week to take over control of the operation, emerged from 3 days of meetings to acknowledge that the way the federal agents have carried out the mission has not been perfect. Additionally, Maine Republican Senator Susan Collins said DHS will end an enforcement surge in her state. DHS says it's arrested more than 3,500 migrants since the operation began on December 1st. It also says the operation is about taking the worst of the worst criminal illegal aliens off the streets, but there are indications that the majority are not serious offenders. Immigration lawyer David Wilson said he figures the ratio runs 10-1 skewed in favor of rank and file arrests versus worst of the worst arrests. And finally, President Trump says Russian President Vladimir Putin has agreed to not fire on cities in Ukraine because of the extreme cold in the war-ravaged country. Jeff Murdoch and Guillaume Patak report Trump announced the temporary cessation at a cabinet meeting after he had called Putin. Ukraine is in the midst of a freezing winter, with temperatures reaching below zero. Last week, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said more than half of the capital of Kyiv had no electricity in the wake of Russian strikes on energy facilities. Zelensky also recently announced video-confirmed drone kills are now responsible for 80% of Ukraine's destruction of Russian targets. John Seward reports the announcement marks another evolution on the battlefield for modern drone warfare and a dramatic shift away from traditional artillery-supported combat. Now, cheap, small drones that are sometimes handmade and costing only a few $100s have replaced artillery as the main weapon of war in Ukraine. Find all today's front page stories at WashingtonTimes.com/front page or the Washington Times app, and find us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on social media at Wash Times for breaking news, sports, commentary, and more. For the Washington Times, I'm George Gerbo.